Hi everyone, I'm Peter Laws from the Flicks the Church Forgot, and I just wanted to make a short video to comment on the sad death of director Wes Craven yesterday. I was really saddened to hear that he'd passed away after suffering from brain cancer. I've been following him for ages now on Twitter, really enjoying his comments and his occasional photographs of sunsets and landscapes that he loved, and I had no idea that he was suffering from any sort of illness. It's sad also because really he was a very significant horror director. I mean, yeah, you look through his filmography and you'll see films in there that might have been a little hokey or in some ways forgettable. That's hard to deny. But in a way, one of the reasons some of his films might have felt a tad mediocre is because some of his films were excellent. In fact, you could say that he was responsible for putting out massively influential films in 3 successive decades. In the 70s, he released Last House on the Left. In the 80s, he put out Nightmare on Elm Street. And in the 90s, he made Scream. All 3 of these films, in their own way, had a massive impact in terms of cinematic horror, but also with Elm Street and Scream, they became pop culture phenomenons. You can catch my in-depth review of Nightmare on Elm Street, by the way, and the concept of metaphysics in my audio podcast. But as I ponder the death of Wes Craven today, I feel a bit glum about it, to be honest, and I find myself thinking of lesser-known films of his that might not have set culture alight, but I've had a soft spot for a long time. For example, his TV movies like Summer of Fear with Linda Blair, which is also known as Stranger in the House from 1978, or his other TV movie called Invitation to Hell with Robert Urich, where he gets a new job in an exclusive neighborhood only to discover that the local health club's actually a portal to hell. Both of these films are very much TV movies. They feel like it. They're in many ways very conventional. Neither of them has any sense of the hard, shocking edge of Last House on the Left. In some ways, you could even say when you watch these films, they are simply serviceable films by any old director. But I still quite like them, and I wonder if that's because Craven managed to put something in there that struck with me. Who knows? One other example of a film that I really love is The Serpent and the Rainbow, which isn't a TV movie but was released theatrically in 1988. I remember seeing that film for the first time and being kind of took aback at how different it felt, how unusual. It explores themes and locations I'd never really seen, at least in a modern horror movie, and I really felt that it stood out as a solid piece of horror cinema with a really great soundtrack by Brad Fiedel. I haven't seen that film in years, so I'd like to revisit it, but I remember really loving it. Or the film Deadly Blessing from 1981, which isn't a brilliant movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it's an intriguing idea of a horror film about repression and murder in an American community of Hittites. It's a little tedious at times, and it feels a bit like his TV movie work in some ways, but it's still an interesting idea, and I think it's indicative of Craven's thoughtfulness, that he likes to present horror in unusual environments, in dreams, in Haiti, in the suburban home, in extreme religious communities. Sharon Stone makes an early appearance in Deadly Blessing and isn't particularly that great, but that's all right. Still, there's a rather creepy Omen-inspired choral score by James Horner, which brings a lot of chills to it. And again, it's just tragic to note that he also died this year as well. Oh, Deadly Blessing gets 1 extra point for having Howie from The Fall Guy in it too. There's also Craven's work for the new Twilight Zone series from the 1980s for TV, which he did some really good segments for that. Namely, I'm thinking of a one called The Little Peace and Quiet, about a woman who discovers a remote control that can pause time. But in the end, she realizes that the moment she's paused at the end is a horrific one. It's a brilliantly morbid and timely horror sci-fi twist, where the program starts fun and happy-go-lucky and just turns very bleak. Also, his episode Her Pilgrim Soul was an interesting exploration of virtual identities with a sweet romantic edge, but has that vibe of films like Her, that's just out recently, but way back there. Jumping back to the 1970s, of course, we have the brutal Hills Have Eyes, which has got to be one of the coolest horror titles ever. The Hills Have Eyes, it's brilliant. And I remember seeing this film as a kid and feeling like it was dangerous. I never actually saw Last House on the Left for ages. It was only legitimately released in the UK when I was older, and I'd recently become a Christian at the time, and I was in a period when I was being told not to watch horror movies, and so I tried to avoid that. And anyway, it also sounded so notoriously grim that I put off watching it for quite a while. But then when I started reassessing horror, I watched it, and it was certainly a horrible film, but it was still a fascinating look at violence in suburbia and how close all of us can be to slipping off the edge of civilized behavior if we're pushed hard enough. You know, I've listened to various interviews with Wes Craven, and he always struck me as a very thoughtful and gentle type of man. And oddly, he always came across as younger than he actually was. He was 78 apparently when he died, and was actually almost 10 years older than John Carpenter. But I always, for some reason, felt like Carpenter was the older one. I'm not really sure why. I can think that was why it was quite a surprise to me to hear that he died yesterday, because I sort of saw him as one of the guys who's always going to be around, well, going to be around for a lot longer, still working on new stuff. I know he was working on new stuff. It's hard to say that Craven put out work that was always on a consistent level of quality, because it wasn't. But maybe that's because he set the grade curve so high for himself with certain standout films. But I still think if you look across his back catalogue as a whole, you'll still find, even in the lesser known works, a thoughtful and interesting and insightful director who's got a keen eye for spotting ideas that would end up having a massive impact on audiences. And just judging from his Twitter comments, he came across, at least to me, as a man who appreciated life and the beauty of it. And so today, my prayers and my thoughts are with Wes Craven and his family. And it's like what often happens when a person dies, you suddenly become appreciative of all that they were and all that they gave to the world.